Hi guys, this is Dayo. So today we are going to be talking about cross hatching. There are so many types of hatching methods that we do on traditional art and also digital art, but we are going to be sticking with cross hatching. So what is cross hatching? Cross hatching is a method of line drawing that describe light and shadows and representation of light utilizes the white or openness of the page, whilst shadow is created by a density of crossed line. So it's practically the representation of values and just knowing where to place the highlights and shadows, and also just practically knowing how to use values using pencils. So what is the difference between hatching and cross hatching? When hatching is used, the line drawn generally go in the same direction and are mostly parallel with each other. Sometimes the line may curve slightly or even grate bit depending on the contour of the object. Lines of this nature are referred to as cross contour line. So the hatching is just having a one single parallel line going downwards, but when we talk about cross hatching is just having lines going through each other, both horizontally and vertically. So I just hope you understand this. Then what is cross hatching and shading? Yeah, let's according to the dictionary, um according to Google, cross hatching is a technique that utilizes parallel intersecting lines to shade an illustration. The denser the line spacing, the darker your object will appear. So that's exactly what I've explained. It's just representing different lines horizontally and vertically as well. In order to represent value, you need to know the stages of cross hatching and also how to actually understand cross hatching. So according to this image that we've got on Google, you can see that cross hatching can be done by understanding light, you knowing the direction where your lights are and knowing where to place your lines, where the thicker lines and where the thinner lines are. So as you can see, the light is at the top left corner. So make sure you know the direction of the light first. So let's just dive into the video to know how to represent the light and shadows using cross hatching. But for now, I'm going to be showing you the different types of light scenario, like different types of shadows, and using a normal ball method. So we are just going to be sticking to in the normal basics. So you just need to understand where your lights and shadows are, and different types of shadows, and meet different types of reflective cast shadows and reflected light and everything on your subject. So but we are going to be using a ball as our subject. So as we all know that the more we apply pressure to our brush, the more opacity it has, like the more thicker it becomes, most especially when you are using a soft round brush or something like a color builder. When you apply more pressure, you are going to have a more opacity of the brush. Then when you apply lesser, you have a less opacity of the brush. So this is the same thing. So the more pressure you apply to a brush, the more value it creates. So as you can see, we can categorize these values into 3 to 4 segments. So but for it not to be complicated, we are going to be categorizing values into 3 segments, only 3 segments, just for it to be very easy to understand. So instead of having 4 different values, we are going to be categorizing values into 3, making the darker tones 1, then making the middle tones 1, then the highlights 1, simplifying them into 3 values. So after we've simplified it into 3 values, we can now be able to easily represent it into our drawings and our cross hatching. But before then, we need to also understand that cross hatching is also deal with, aside from knowing how to represent values, it also deals with difference in brush. So we don't use brush in cross hatching. We don't use brush. As you can see, I'm using a color builder brush for this particular illustration, so we actually don't use brush. But I'm just trying to show you the difference between using of brush to do value painting and also cross hatching. So we only use pencils for cross hatching. There's a difference in brush when it comes to cross hatching and also shading, but we can use the same knowledge you have in in shading of the ball to cross hatch. So just make sure you stick around and be patient and see how I illustrate both and show you the difference between the two. There's not much of a difference, but the only difference lies in the brush we use. So I use a brush for a paint brush for this illustration, but when I'm coming to do my cross hatching, I am going to be using a pencil for this illustration, for this particular video. So we only use pencils for cross hatching. So whenever we are doing our shading, we don't mostly use pencil to shade. We only use pencil for sketching because we want to have a paint look. So cross hatching is not a painting technique, it's a sketching technique. So is the only way you can do it, you can only use your pencil to achieve that feel and texture. You cannot use a feel and texture. As you can see, this is the only way you can use a brush to achieve value painting. But when it comes to value sketching, we are going to be using our pencils. You can either choose to use any of the pencils, any of the HB pencils available in your softwares. But for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the 4H and 6B. But let me show you something. If you go to the section of fine art in Autodesk Sketchbook, there's a section of fine art which has different variation of HB pencils, from which varies from the HB, 4H, 3H, 2B, so many pencils, 5B, 6B, 7B. So the more you go respectively, the more you go forward with the pencil, the more you apply the pencil, the more thicker it becomes. The more you apply, the more thicker it becomes, the more opacity increases, the more so they have arranged the pencils in a way that the more you apply, the more you go forward, the more opacity it increases. So this is the variation of values that we have in these brushes. But for it not to be very complicated, we are going to be categorizing all these three values into three. So for us, the first one is going to be the highlights, the second the base, then the third is going to be our shadows. So for us to do that, we are going to be picking our 4H pencil, which will represent that of the highlights and the mid-tone. Then we are going to be taking our 6B for our shadows because it's more thicker. As you can see from the different view of the that 4H is more lighter than 6B. So we are going to be sticking with these two brushes for it to be very easy for us to work with. So now we are going to be diving into the illustration of cross hatching. I'm going to be showing you how to cross hatch using the bow method. So we have already seen how we use our paintbrush to represent value and to. So now we are going to simply just draw a ball using our 4H pencil. So after drawing a ball, I would recommend you to follow up this tutorial for you to actually understand how to go about cross hatching. So after doing a cycle using your 4H pencil, you can practically use any lighter pencil. It mustn't be a 4H pencil. So we are going to be just adjust the brightness of the background to a gray color, just for us to actually pop out the sketching. Because we are using a pencil, we are going to use a darker background, like a more gray background, for us to achieve our sketching our sketch achieve our sketching, like for it to feel more like we are drawing on paper. So as you can see, I am just laying down the hatching now. Presently I'm presently hatching, just laying down the lines horizontally. Then after laying down the lines, you can, if you think that the lines is too lighter, you can still add or duplicate layers for you to achieve a darker line, for you to visibly see it without stressing your eye. So now I'm going to do this cross hatching. So cross hatching is just actually having horizontally and vertically lines intersecting each other. So we are all done with the cross hatching. This is just like a general cross hatching. We are not representing any value to it yet, but for us to represent value to it yet, you need to understand how this cross hatching works first. We need to We need to lay down our horizontal lines, then lay down our vertical lines. Or first you can start with the vertical lines, then you do the horizontal line. So you can also use a 6B pencil to have a darker value, like a darker value of that's when you are working with you are trying to represent value to your sketching. You just need to use a darker pencil to represent a darker value, then you use a lighter pencil to represent a lighter value. So all these things are tied to pressure you apply to your brush. The more pressure you apply to your brush, the more darker it becomes. The less pressure you apply to your brush, the less darker it becomes, and the more lighter it becomes. So with all the illustration that we've done, let's try and see how we can still represent it to our brushes. The more pressure you apply to your brush, being it round brush or a color builder or any of these brushes, the more opacity it has, the more thicker it becomes. So this is the same method you're going to be using in your cross hatching, but just the difference is that cross hatching only involves pencils, while painting or value painting involves brushes alone. So let's continue our cross hatching tutorial. So since we have laid down our general cross hatching, we are going to be representing this value by the side to our already cross hatch ball. We are going to be using the 6B pencil to represent the darker tone, the darker tone, the darker core shadow. So you can just be checking the ball, the representation of tones by the side, the presentation of shadows by the side. You can see the half tone, you can see the shadows, you can see the shadow core, you can see the light, reflected light, you can see the accents, you can see everything. But you just need to center your, for you not to be distracted, you need to center your eyes to just three values. So after you've, and just make sure you understand how to apply pressure to your pencil while creating value to the ball. So we are just starting with the darker side. We're just trying to shade the darker area of the ball. Now after you've gotten the darker area of the ball using your 6B pencil, you can still use switch in between the 4H and the 6B pencil just to like get a more refined transition, just to like get a more refined transition. You can also cross hatch when you think your shading is beginning to look like just a hatching. So make sure you intersect the lines properly and make sure is aligned to the initial cross hatching you've made already from the beginning. So the general cross hatching is just like a foundation you've laid down to follow, like a pattern you've laid down for the future shading, just for you to like understand where the lines and the patterns of the lines are going, so that your work will not be very rough. So after laying down the darker tone of your ball, you can still duplicate for you to get a more darker version. And also you can use your soft round, you can use your soft eraser to like clean up some sides that you think is too like it's having more opacity. So what we are going to be doing next is we are going to, after representing the core shadow and also the shadow, we are still going to be using our 4B pencil to still refine the transition between those shadows from the to like understand the, like to refine the transition, instead of it to be very obvious that there is a core shadow there. We want to like have a gradient feel in between the general cross hatched and also the general cross hatch, which is the initial cross hatch we've done from the beginning, and with the one we've already laid down for the shadow, the core shadow and the shadow. We want to have a transition in between the reflected light, the core shadow, the shadow, and all those types of shadows. So we want to have a smooth transition between the half tone, the light, the highlight, the shadow core, the shadow, the reflected light, and the cast shadow. We just want to have a smooth transition. So just make sure you keep creating layers and keep refining using your pencil. Just keep refining the sketch, keep refining the cross sketch. So now we are trying to lay down the accent and the cast shadow. We are doing this particular accent and cast shadow on a different layer. Don't be afraid to apply pressure to your 6B because we are trying to achieve a more darker tone for this. So just make sure you apply more pressure just to achieve a cast shadow under the ball. So I've noticed that our shading is going into our ball, so we need to use our eraser to clean up the rough um the rough lines going into our ball. We just want to have that smooth transition between the ball and the cast shadow, the shadow reflected light, the shadows and the cast shadows and the accent. So we don't want anything to go into each other, so we just want everything to be in the same place. So as you can see, the cast shadow is on a different layer, then the rest of the halftone, the lights, the shadows are also on a different layer. But before then, we are still not done. We can also use our soft eraser to like clean up the upper side, that upper side, to like have a nicer and more lighter feel. Then after doing that, we are going to be doing a little bit of adjustments by the side to have a more transition, to a more gradient and soft transition. We are not trying to achieve a hard edge by the side of the ball. We need to have a half tone to transit into a shadow core, then shadows. So instead of you to have a hard transition, is expected for you to have a soft transition. After doing the transition between the light, the halftone and the shadow core, we are going to be applying the highlights on a different layer. Make sure you know the direction of your light, then you start with hatching, then you cross hatch. You can do the hatching using the 4H pencil, then you can, after cross hatching using the 4H pencil, you can still go ahead to use your 6B pencil to refine and have a more thicker highlight if you want. So we are trying to like put a little bit of rimness by the edge of the ball, just to make the ball look more 3D and well defined. So we are going to be using our 6B pencil. To make sure your 6B pencil is having 100% opacity, then you can just apply the highlight on the ball. So as you can see, we have successfully represented the ball method. We have successfully represented the ball method using cross hatching and representing values and seeing all the values on the ball and everything we initially spoke about. So you can see that there's no much of a difference between the cross hatching method and also the normal value painting method. All you need to do is just to understand how to use your pencil and how the variation of pressure is on both brushes and pencils, how to use the pressure, how to use pressure on pencil, and how to use pressure on pencils, and also how to use pressure on your brushes. So there's not much of a difference in this technique. It's just the difference in brushes. Just try to understand how to use these pencils to achieve your values. So I'm just trying to since I've changed the background, I'm just trying to apply some gray background for the ball, so that we can still compare the two illustrations we've done for both of the pencils and the brush. So I'm going to be keeping side by side comparison of the ball sketching and also the ball painting. So as you can see, it's not much of a difference in as much as I just rushed the painting for the ball. I just did a rough painting for the ball. You can see that the difference is not too much. There's not too much of a difference. It's just the difference in brush strokes. So yeah, it's all the same thing, and you can use the same knowledge to achieve the same thing. So you just need to understand how to use your pencils and how to use your brushes when you are having two different techniques, when you are doing two different techniques. So just understand that the more you apply pressure to your brush, the more you have a darker tone. So the less pressure you apply to your brush, the less darker tone you get. So after using ball to illustrate all these techniques, we are going to be also seeing how we can incorporate this to our human painting, to our portrait painting. So but before then, I'm still going to refer you back to how to use your brushes, how to use pressure on your brushes, and how to incorporate that technique to knowing how to paint values. So as you can see, the soft round brush that I've slightly drawn and increased the length is creating a transition, a gradient transition between the lighter part of the brush, the lighter value, and the darker value. So that which is the highlights, the mid-tone, and the shadows. So guys, we've come to the end of this tutorial. If this video was helpful, a sub to this channel will be appreciated, and if you're new to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up on this particular video if you really like the video. And if you have any question, drop it down in the comment section. I'm going to be replying you ASAP. So thank you so much guys. See you in my next video. Bye.